Everyone finds himself changing jobs eventually. When my former employer lost the contract at the post I was working at and failed to place me at another one, I found myself looking around. Allied Universal, which was formerly Allied Barton, invited me to an open house they were having. So, this is my experience with Allied Universal. I filled out an application at the open house, talked with an interviewer, and was immediately hired. I found out later that the reason for this was the location they wanted to place me at wanted someone older and with a little more experience. Well, I'm 60 years old with 5 years experience, so I was exactly what they were looking for. At this point, I wondered what the hourly rate would be because it wasn't discussed at the interview. I was told I was to go to something called orientation. I assumed my hourly rate would be discussed then. After the background check, which is normal procedure, it only took a few days, I went to this orientation. 3.5 hours of boredom, mostly watching videos, but the last part consisted of a series of tests. I was told that if I didn't pass one of these tests, I wouldn't be hired. Keep in mind, I was told I was hired at the interview. I had already written a letter of resignation to my former employer. I had passed the background check and also passed the drug test that I took at this orientation, and now I am told if I fail this test, I'm not hired. Even though the test was easy for someone fresh out of security school or with security experience, if for some reason you fail this test, you're not hired even if you were told you were hired at the previous interview. This procedure is not acceptable. And at this orientation, my hourly rate was still not discussed. Still, I was not discouraged about not knowing what my hourly rate is. I thought, this is a big company, their payment rate must be at least somewhat decent. Well, I went to the location and trained 2 days with the supervisor there, and I was told I was to meet the president of the board of directors. Then I would begin a regular schedule. After the meeting, I talked to someone named Frank from Allied Universal who addressed himself as the operations manager. Since I was to begin a regular schedule at this location, I asked this operations manager what my hourly rate was. He said it was $9.50 an hour, but, and this is a quote, he said, "You must have made a hell of an impression at the meeting because they want to start you at $10.50 an hour instead." And continued by saying, "I will get this into the system soon." Well, after a few pay periods, I called this Frank and asked when the new $10.50 rate would take effect. He said, quote, "Who told you I was to change your hourly rate?" I said, "You told me." He said, "There must be some kind of misunderstanding," which is a lie because he told my supervisor exactly the same thing he had told me. The rest of the conversation was just attempting to patronize me by saying things like he would give everyone a raise if he could. Let me show you why this statement made by Frank is highly unlikely. Joe Smo is an employee of Allied Universal. If he was given a raise of, let's say, $40 a month, this cost is not absorbed by the company. This cost is passed on to the client of the location he's working at plus another 1/3. So the cost to the client is a total of $60 a month for a raise to the employee of $40. Now the operations manager must notify the client of the new increase to them, which most likely would not be welcome because most of these communities are on a tight budget. So getting a raise in pay isn't very likely because these contract procedures by Allied Universal charging their client the pay raise plus another approximately 33%. But let me show you what this Frank, the operations manager, tried to pull. Please keep in mind this is hearsay. I cannot prove it at the time this video was made. That may change in the future, but the information I'm about to show you came from very reliable sources. Joe Smo's hourly rate is, let's say, $11 an hour after being there a year. So the client is billed at this rate plus 33%. Joe Schmo leaves the company and John Schmo takes his place at $9 an hour. So the client is billed at this rate plus 33%. But the operations manager, Frank, continues to bill the client at Joe's $11 rate instead of the new employee, John's rate at $9 an hour. By doing this, apparently increases Frank's yearly bonus the company somehow factors in. Again, I got this information from very reliable sources, but to this date cannot prove it. If I could, I would expose it. But after telling me he will comply with the client's request to adjust my hourly rate from $9.50 to $10.50, then denying he ever said it, even without the reliable sources giving me the information I just revealed, I would find what Frank, the operations manager, did to this client highly likely, given the lies he attempted to lay on me. Another indication of Frank's deceptive nature is the hourly rate increase requested by the client was made before my first full pay week, which was February 9th, 2017. Frank sent an email to the property manager on February 20th stating the property manager must sign an addendum for the rate increase. The property manager replied with 2 words in an email sent back to Frank, and those words were, "Send it." It is now March 31st, more than 1 full month, and Frank has not yet sent the addendum to be signed. The property manager sent another email for this addendum at my request on March 30th. Conclusion. These are my experiences with Allied Universal. When hired, my hourly rate was not discussed. After being congratulated by the interviewer for being hired, if I failed a test at orientation, I would not be hired even though a letter of resignation was already written to my former employer. I was to receive a higher hourly rate approved by the board of directors, but the operations manager refuses to comply and lies to me, denying he told me he would comply, and I have a witness. And I didn't mention this in the video. I was given only 1 uniform and was told more were ordered. After almost 3 months, I've not been notified by anyone to pick them up. As I said at the beginning of the video, these are my experiences with Allied Universal only after a short 3 months. If you decide to work for them, you may very well have the same or similar experiences.